So in my next video, I thought as I'm out here in Wales and out in the country, which is really nice, apart from the kid that's repeatedly kicking the ball against the fence, which is kind of irritating, to answer the next question in the set. So, when does geometry stop being fun? And that's a interesting one, isn't it? When you're building something, let's go back. How fun are rigid 26-inch bikes? I mean, actually, like they're the precursor to the modern mountain bike was just that. Until the RockShox RS1 come along, every bike was a rigid mountain bike, often with a few cruiser and road components thrown in to make it just about work. So one thing that we strive to do, I think, especially when we started making bikes, is we wanted to make the fastest bikes we could, and making racing bikes is kind of challenging, and it's one of the best bits of the job, in my opinion, because if you build something that is made to be tested against the clock and you get good riders on them, it's kind of the epitome of of making bicycles. So it's like kind of a pride thing that you make the fastest bikes on earth. And I think the Narcissist is probably one of the fastest hardtails you can get your hands on, and there's a few other contenders, but in general, when the results are coming back, Josh is posting times on his hardtail now that they're not far off the other guys that are racing full suspension bikes. I mean, Lord help them when we get a lot of full suspension bikes out there, because geometry has a big effect on that. But one of the questions I was posed is, what about bikes being made for fun? And mountain biking by its own nature is fun, pretty much everything about it is fun. Even pushing up muddy hills, I guess, is more fun than being in an office. So we all have a different idea of fun, and I think what Tim was doing when he started to develop Hacksaw was that he was edging off the geometry that added stability, especially at high speed, from our bikes. So he started to shorten up the chainstays. It's one of the criticisms that we have is that our chainstays are pretty long. Now, the reason that we do that is because making a balanced bike, I feel like a lot of the times when I look at some of the production bikes, how they've been designed, I look at them and I think, have you ever ridden a prototype of that? Because it's very far and away from what I feel makes a good bike. And balance is really, really important. So you're seeing a lot of bikes now where they're extending the reach and geometry, but they're still slamming the chainstays. Now, it's kind of like a baked Alaska pie, one of those sponge and ice cream with a hot meringue on the outside. I mean, it does work, but it's greater than the sum of its parts. So I feel like a lot of the time, and I could be wrong on this, that it's more a kind of dick measuring contest with reach and stuff like that, rather than building a whole package. And we didn't set out to be like, our bikes are really big, we make a really big bike, but a lot of the riders that we when we first started making the Narcissist, they were like, I'm a pretty tall rider, like guys like Joe Cantello, Scott Fitz, who runs Southern Enduro, Simon, they're really, really big guys, and they kind of haven't had a bike that fits them before in general. And I think a lot of that is to do with most bikes that are built offshore. The rigs are, the jigs, the rigs? That'd be a welding rig. The welding jigs are they only go so big, and also the tubing as well. I know a lot of companies have found problems with steel tubing, particularly the older Reynolds sets. I mean, when we made the Narcissist, I think we just mitered off the tube. We didn't cut them to length because you couldn't really, because we needed as much length as we could. So we balanced that reach, the top tube length, and adding chainstay length. So we don't have a race to have the shortest chainstays, and that takes away a lot of what people call playful characteristics. And playful characteristics, and one of the things of a bike is instability. So it means it's very like a speedboat, like a tiny, like a jet-powered speedboat. It can whip round very, very quickly, and that is fun. Wow, I said fun with the least fun in my voice possible. Fun. But that instability allows a very, very eccentric ride. It's very lively and all over the place, whereas we tend to focus around the bikes being very stable, and they err on the side of being boring to ride. The first time, I think it was Tristan Swinley said that when he was riding it felt very slow, but he knew that he was going fast. It was just with the geometry and the length, it kind of smooths everything out, so you have a lot more time to do stuff. So this is probably things that already know about the brand, because we talked about it a lot of times, but how does that go forward, and what do we think about? So when we're going to production bikes now, we're having very defined thoughts about what we're doing going forward, and that's that we're going to build in instability in some of the smaller travel models. So we have a 130mm full suspension bike coming out into prototyping at the moment. I'm steepening up the head angle a bit, and taking the chainstay and the reach down a little bit, moving to 27.5 tyres. And the reason for that is we kind of want to have at least one full suspension bike in the range that's kind of a twin of Hacksaw, So Death Wish is basically the same as the Hacksaw, but it's still way more stable. It has like a slacker head angle. We're going to start steepening some things up and making them a bit shorter on the shorter travel bikes. And then when we get up into the bigger 180 rigs and stuff, which are obviously built around higher speeds and more performance orientated, then we'll be back into traditional sick geometry. So it's something we've been thinking about, is that we don't really want to build a full range of very, 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 very similar bikes. But we're also cautious about a lot of the time when we're being driven to do these geometry changes, that we're not just getting peer pressured into going against what we believe in, and basically ended up with another brand's bike, like an Orange P7 or a Stanton Slackline with our name on it. We don't really want to do that. I mean, there's an ample opportunity for other things to be out there and to do those things, and if you want that bike, you can just go and buy it, and they're well made, and you can have one of them, this week. So we don't really want to get too caught up in that. But at the same time, when we're sitting and talking as a team, all of us, we know that there is a space in the brand to have more play-orientated bikes. I mean, we knew it when we started with the Hacksaw. So that's one of the things that we've been considering quite heavily, is that we've been so driven towards performance that you might have started to sacrifice fun a bit. And this is weird, right? Because basically we're moving in the opposite direction when you're getting brands like Kotick, etc., where they're making long shot geometry and their bikes are getting bigger, and they're like, we've kind of focused on fun and now we're focusing on performance, and we're kind of coming back the other way. So we want to have a little bit of leeway. Now, it's going to get a bit more technical. I don't really want to go too much into the mathematics of stuff, because one, it can be pretty boring, and two, it bores me to talk about it. But someone's always asked us about the head tube. Does 62 degrees on the head tube damage the forks in any way? Now, we have obviously talked to a lot of fork manufacturers, and one in particular as well, to make sure that we know we're doing the right thing and that the testing comes out okay and the fork manufacturers agree that it's okay. But also, if you imagine you're riding a full suspension bike and you've got a traditional 65 to 67 degree head angle or whatever, it goes all over the place. But if you imagine that, the rear suspension compresses but the front doesn't for whatever reason, that you're already in that position many times. Of course, once again, when you want to have full suspension bikes, you could move in any of the other planes and get an even more extreme head angle. But the bikes are built around it. They're built around that kind of that kind of stress and strain in that particular area. So you get people saying, well, I look at it, it's going to snap off. One, they say it quite frequently on the 4130 frames, and as you know, the steel frames, especially when post-heat treated as well, with the amount of gussets on them, I mean, they're likely to outlive you. That's what we've designed them for, to be. You know, they're not the lightest bikes on earth, but we kind of like, you know, you could almost pass it on to a family member because it ain't going nowhere. That was one of the things we wanted with all of our steel hardtails and full suspension bikes, was that once you bought one, that was kind of it for that, you know. You'd never really get rid of it, and you certainly wouldn't be pulling it in for a warranty repair. So the 62-degree head angle is not particularly to be of any concern with. Now, what about climbing? Now, I think this is really odd. Like, we fought criticism for the 62-degree head angle all the way from the beginning. But one of the biggest ones was like, how will it affect its climbing? And it's like, really? That's a concern. Ah, man, I mean, we don't settle down and build great climbing bikes. Sometimes they tend to, just by accident, really. The steep seat angle certainly helps the grip be in the middle, and they climb okay. You know, they definitely climb. I mean, anything will, within reason. I mean, I climbed a nuke-proof downhill World Cup downhill rig at the weekend, but I got it up there. Down Duro is the thing. I was talking to Ray, and he said he got the orange 29 downhill bike, 180mm travel at the back. He's like, put SRAM Eagle on it. Gold. That's the one. That's the forward. That's the stand. I'm like, maybe. I mean, we've got a couple of 29ers with 180mm travel coming out at the moment, and it's like, you know, they're very downhill orientated, very gravity orientated. So that's something. Now, how would a 62-degree head angle affect you going uphill? Well, I mean, it's not like anything's going to jump out at you at that speed. I'd rather that my bike was geared towards the bit that I'm doing when it's dangerous. You know, I wouldn't be like, well, I can't lose some of that steering when I'm climbing at 3 miles an hour, you know, so that when I'm descending. No, I want the descending when the trees try and come at me and my friend cases a jump to the side and I have to, wow, you know, like, that's kind of what I'm looking for, rather than, you know, any other bit of it. That's definitely true. So I think if you're looking for a hill climbing cross-country performance bike, we've probably not got the bikes for you. We tend to very much focus. In fact, Mike Levy, I think it was doing a review of the Zeroed, and he said he was talking about its climbing was tedious, and really noticed the weight and the drag of it, and you know, all of these things on the trails. And then he like starts describing it descending. And he's like driving, it's like doing donuts in a tank, listening to Slayer turned up to 11. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that's better than any sales pitch that I could come out with. You know, that's what I want our bikes to do. I don't really care about climbing particularly much. You know, it should do it. You know, one of my big influences is one of the Kona Out of Bounds bikes that they made, the original sort of like free ride bikes, where you could just about grind your way up with a double chainring on these, and then you could ride down because there was no shuttle, there was no lift. You know, but they're still downhill and gravity orientated bikes and fun orientated, but you can just about climb them. And I think it's going to take me a long time until I get out of that mindset. I hope it does anyway, you know, like I hope I'm always feeling like that. So when you look at our geometry and you feel like it's too long, and switchbacks as well. Will your bike get around a switchback? I've never really struggled with that either. Like outside of the train station, outside my house, it's like zigzag kind of like a wheelchair access ramp. And when we got the first prototype from Canterbury, I rode it off the train, like literally off the train, like. And then I rode down the switchback things, and it was like, oh yeah, it's fine. I mean, I don't think I've ever come a cropper on a longer bike where I wouldn't have on anything else. I think it's really, I think what makes a bigger difference than that is dual crowns. You know, like you have to get around anything tight on dual crowns. That gets tedious real quick, but none of that. So that's that's my thought on geometry. One of the other things that probably strikes people as odd when they look at our bikes, it's easier to visualize if I explain it this way. All of the geometry began as on the hardtails as a long travel bike 30% into sag. So that's where we started, and the reason we did that was so that between the hardtail and the full suspension bikes, if you frequently swap between them, they'd feel similar. So it kind of feels weird to an outsider, someone maybe a hardtail rider and they used to really slam bottom bracket, really slam chainstays. But ours was kind of built around it that if you went between that and a long travel enduro or downhill bike, they'd feel really similar. So that was kind of one of our selling points on that. If at least to each other, it wasn't really a selling point to anyone outside. 6 months ago, no one really cared who we were, and now we're kind of under scrutiny and having to explain ourselves. It's kind of clear why we did things. So hopefully that's interesting. Now, does the long... a lot of the questions we're getting about geometry are kind of reminiscent of when people had suspension the first time. Like, can you bunny hop a bike with suspension? Can you do a jump? Because doesn't it just soak it up? And of course, now it doesn't. So yeah, the bikes jump fine. You see Josh, and he's got one of the longer, slacker narcissists, and he's whipping it and tabletopping it, and and pulling toboggans and stuff. So you can't say they're not fun. Whether you're good enough to ride it is a different thing. But that's a good debate. But I hope that has been relatively interesting. It's not as exciting as the last one about sponsorship, but I wanted to talk about geometry. So I've been up in Wales for the last week. Got to ride for the first time in 6 months. Me and Tim, we kind of had to get rid of all of our bikes when we started the business so we could fund it. So we didn't get to ride very much, and that's how we used to spend most of our time. We spend most of our time working on products now. However, the payoff is in the future is that we literally get to do bikes, for the rest of our life. So that's good. So there's not too much to moan about there. But I went to ride at Antistiniog, and I got absolutely bad on the course. It was really, really hard work. I do love that place. It's got to be the perfect place for testing the bike. So, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully that answered some questions. Attempted to. And I'll speak to you guys soon. Have a good one.